The person who cannot be moved, that is the one who moves everyone. There is a specific kind of empath walking among you right now, and avoidant personalities, those fortress-walled, emotionally sealed, commitment-terrified human beings, cannot resist them. Not because this empath is soft, not because they chase, not because they love harder or beg more eloquently. Precisely the opposite. What you are about to discover will rewrite everything you thought you understood about emotional dynamics, attraction, and the psychology of the avoidant mind. Most people approach the avoidant with tools that guarantee failure: more warmth, more patience, more proving themselves worthy of someone who has built an entire identity around not needing anyone. This empath does none of that. There is a psychological principle buried inside the architecture of avoidant attachment that almost nobody talks about, and this one empath type has stumbled into alignment with it, sometimes without even knowing. When you understand what that principle is, and what kind of inner structure produces it naturally, you will never approach another relationship the same way again. Stay with this. What is coming will not simply inform you, it will pressure you, it will demand something from you. That is exactly the point. People believe that to reach an avoidant, you must become gentler. They believe that if they simply pour enough warmth, enough understanding, enough unconditional love into that cold and fortified space, the walls will eventually dissolve. That belief is not just wrong, it is the very mechanism that keeps the avoidant locked inside their own prison and keeps you locked outside of it, pressing your face against the glass, wondering what you did wrong. The truth is far more uncomfortable than that, and far more empowering, if you are willing to sit with it long enough to let it change you. Avoidant attachment is not a mystery, it is a survival strategy. Somewhere in the early architecture of that person's life, in childhood bedrooms, in kitchens with parents who were physically present but emotionally absent, in moments where reaching out for comfort was met with withdrawal or ridicule or simply nothing, that person's nervous system learned a devastating lesson. It learned that needing people is dangerous. It learned that intimacy is a trap. It learned that the safest version of love is the kind you never fully enter, because what you never fully enter cannot fully destroy you. That is not weakness. That is the mind doing what the mind does best, protecting the organism at all costs, even when the cost is connection itself. So the avoidant grows up. They become charming, often, intelligent frequently, successful in many cases. They build a life that looks complete from the outside because they have become extraordinarily skilled at filling the space where deep intimacy should live with achievement, independence, and the comfortable numbness of emotional distance. And they attract people. They attract people powerfully because there is something magnetic about someone who does not seem to need you. The psychology of desire is cruel in that way. What withholds itself becomes precious. What is freely given gets taken for granted. The avoidant, without even trying, has mastered the architecture of longing. And then comes the empath. Most empaths walk into this dynamic with open hands and an open heart, which is beautiful, which is genuine, which is also catastrophically misaligned with what an avoidant nervous system can receive. The avoidant does not experience that open-handed warmth as safety. They experience it as pressure. Every act of love becomes a demand in the architecture of their mind. Every expression of need, no matter how softly delivered, triggers the ancient alarm system that says, too close, too much, too dangerous, retreat. And so they retreat. And the empath, bewildered and wounded, tries harder. More love, more proof, more patience, more waiting. And the avoidant retreats further because the pressure has increased, because that is what their nervous system does with pressure. It runs. This is the cycle that destroys people. This is the cycle that has kept some of the most loving, most emotionally intelligent human beings on this planet in a state of chronic self-doubt, chronic heartbreak, chronic questioning of their own worth. The problem was never their worth. The problem was strategy. The problem was that they were bringing a language the avoidance nervous system was structurally incapable of hearing. The empath type that breaks this cycle entirely does not do so by learning to love less. Understand that clearly. This is not about withholding yourself, not about playing games, not about manufacturing distance as a manipulation tactic. Those approaches are hollow and they produce hollow results. What this particular empath has developed, either through years of hard psychological work or through a kind of hard-won wisdom that suffering sometimes produces, is something categorically different. It is a self-structure so solid, so genuinely rooted, that it does not bend toward the avoidance withdrawal. It does not chase, it does not collapse, it does not perform. it simply stands. And that standing, is the single most disorienting thing an avoidant human being can encounter, because their entire relational model is built on a predictable equation. Get close, trigger anxiety, withdraw, watch the other person chase, feel temporarily powerful, feel ultimately empty, repeat. Every relationship they have ever had has confirmed this equation. Every person who loved them has eventually broken under the pressure of the withdrawal and chased them back into a counterfeit closeness. The avoidant has been running this pattern so long they have forgotten it is a pattern. They believe it is simply how relationships work. They believe this is simply who they are. Then this empath enters the picture and refuses to run the equation. The withdrawal happens because it always happens, and this empath does not chase. Not out of cruelty, not out of indifference, not because they do not care, because they care deeply. That is the nature of what they are. They do not chase because they have built an interior life so rich, so genuinely sustaining, that the avoidance withdrawal does not create a vacuum inside them that must immediately be filled. They return to themselves. They return to their work, their growth, their friendships, their own psychological and spiritual development. They remain present in the relationship without being consumed by the avoidance emotional weather patterns. This is the first pillar of what makes this empath type uniquely powerful in the presence of an avoidant. Genuine, unperformed self-sufficiency. Not the performed independence of someone who is secretly dying inside and white-knuckling their way through the pain. Real self-sufficiency. The kind that comes from having done the inner work of building a life you do not need to escape from. A sense of self that does not require external validation to remain upright. When an avoidant withdraws from this empath and looks back over their shoulder, because they always look back, this is the part nobody tells you, they do not see someone crumbling. They do not see someone frantically reaching. They see someone living, fully, without them. And that is the first crack in the avoidance fortress, because it confronts them with a reality their psychology has never had to process before. The possibility that they could actually be left, not threatened with being left, actually left, by someone who is not even angry, just whole. That confrontation does something to the avoidant nervous system that nothing else can replicate. It introduces genuine uncertainty where there was once comfortable predictability. And uncertainty for an avoidant is the beginning of real feeling, because feeling for them has always been the thing on the other side of the wall. The wall exists to prevent feeling. When the equation breaks down, the wall develops cracks. When the wall develops cracks, feeling begins to leak through. And the avoidant, often for the first time in years, begins to feel something they do not have a familiar name for. Something that feels like longing without the usual safety net of knowing the other person will be waiting. There is a psychological concept you need to understand here because it is the engine beneath everything being described. It is called the activation of the attachment system. Every human being, regardless of their attachment style, has a deep biological drive toward bonding. In secure individuals, this drive operates relatively smoothly. Approach, connect, receive, give, repeat. In avoidance, this drive has been suppressed and rerouted by years of conditioning that equated closeness with danger. But suppressed does not mean destroyed. The attachment drive is still there, operating beneath the surface, waiting for the conditions under which it is safe enough to emerge. The tragedy of the avoidant is that they have built such effective defenses against those conditions that almost nothing breaks through. Almost nothing. What breaks through is precisely what this empath embodies, because this empath, through their genuine self-possession, through their refusal to collapse or chase, through their authentic emotional warmth that is offered without desperation, creates the first relational environment the avoidant has ever encountered that does not immediately confirm their deepest fear. The fear that says, if I let someone close, I will be consumed, I will be controlled, I will lose myself entirely. This empath does not consume. This empath does not control. This empath has their own life, their own depth, their own center of gravity. And standing in the presence of that, the avoidance nervous system receives a message it has never received before. A message that whispers, perhaps closeness does not have to mean the end of myself. Perhaps this is different. That whisper is everything. That whisper is the beginning of real movement in an avoidant. And it only comes because this empath never tried to force it, never engineered it, never manipulated their way toward it. It came because of who this empath genuinely is, at the level of character, at the level of psychological structure, at the level of having done the hardest and most unglamorous work a human being can do, the work of becoming a full person. What nobody prepares you for, when you begin to understand avoidant psychology at this depth, is the discomfort of your own reflection in it. Because here is what the avoidant and the typical empath have in common. Beneath all the surface differences, beneath the withdrawal and the pursuit, beneath the coldness and the warmth, they are both, in their own distinct ways, running from the same thing. The avoidant runs from intimacy by building walls. The typical empath runs from their own emptiness by filling it with someone else's emotional world. Two different escape routes from the same unbearable vulnerability. Two different strategies for never having to sit alone with the full weight of who they are. That is a difficult thing to read. It is meant to be. The empath type that genuinely reaches the avoidant has stopped running. That is the most precise way to say it. They have turned around and walked directly into the discomfort they spent years avoiding. The discomfort of their own company, the discomfort of their own unmet needs, the discomfort of acknowledging that they too had been using relationships as a means of self-escape rather than self-expression. That reckoning is brutal. It does not happen in a weekend retreat or through a series of affirmations written on a bathroom mirror. It happens in the long, quiet, unglamorous hours of genuine self-examination. It happens when you stop asking why the avoidant will not open up and start asking why their closure affects you with the particular intensity that it does. That question, why does this affect me so deeply, is the doorway to everything. Most people stand at that doorway and walk away from it, because what lives on the other side is not comfortable. What lives on the other side is usually a younger version of yourself, in a situation not entirely unlike the avoidant's own origin story, learning the same lesson in a different form, learning that your emotional needs were too much, learning that love was conditional, learning that to be accepted, you had to perform a version of yourself that was more palatable, more contained, more useful to the people whose approval you depended on for survival. The empath and the avoidant are not opposites. They are two expressions of the same wound, wearing different masks. When the empath understands this, truly understands it, not intellectually but in the bones, in the nervous system, in the place where old decisions about the self were made and stored, something fundamental shifts in how they move through relationships. They stop experiencing the avoidance withdrawal as a verdict on their worth. They stop interpreting emotional distance as evidence of their own inadequacy. They begin to see the withdrawal for what it actually is, a trauma response, a survival mechanism, a frightened person inside an adult body doing the only thing their nervous system knows how to do when the territory of closeness becomes overwhelming. And from that seeing comes something that is not pity and is not enabling and is not the soft collapse into endless accommodation that destroys most empath-avoidant dynamics. What comes from that seeing is a grounded, clear-eyed compassion, the kind that can hold space for someone's struggle without losing itself in it. This is the second pillar of what makes this empath type so singularly powerful. Grounded compassion. Not the compassion that martyrs itself, not the compassion that says, I will absorb your pain indefinitely and call it love. Grounded compassion is the compassion that says, I see your wound clearly, I understand where it comes from, I am not going to pretend it does not exist or demand that you dissolve it immediately, and I am also not going to organize my entire existence around managing it for you. Grounded compassion holds the line. It extends genuine warmth and genuine understanding while simultaneously maintaining the integrity of its own boundaries. It refuses to participate in the dynamic that keeps the avoidant comfortable in their avoidance. Because here is the thing that most loving people miss entirely. When you endlessly accommodate the avoidance withdrawal, when you make yourself smaller, quieter, less emotionally present so that they do not feel pressured, you are not helping them heal. You are helping them hide. You are, with the best of intentions and the fullest of hearts, reinforcing the very walls you want to dissolve. Every time you swallow your needs to preserve their comfort, you confirm their unconscious belief that their emotional world is too fragile to withstand contact with another person's full reality. You become, without meaning to, a participant in their limitation. And you diminish yourself in the process, which means you are now bringing a diminished version of yourself into the relationship, which paradoxically makes you less attractive to the avoidant, not more, because what initially drew them to you, your depth, your realness, your psychological substance, has been slowly bled out through 1,000 small self-betrayals. The empath who breaks this pattern refuses that diminishment. Not aggressively, not as a power play, but from a place of genuine self-respect that has been earned through the hard internal work of knowing their own value at a level that does not depend on the avoidance recognition of it. This empath brings their full self into the relationship and keeps bringing it, consistently, without apology, without performance, without the desperate edge that transforms authentic self-expression into emotional demand. They speak their truth calmly. They name their needs clearly. They do not inflate those needs into ultimatums, and they do not deflate them into silence. They occupy the full space of who they are, and they allow the avoidant to respond to that fullness however they are capable of responding, without collapsing if the response is insufficient. That level of self-possession is not natural. Let that be stated plainly. Nobody is born with it. It is constructed. It is built piece by piece through experiences that test it, through relationships that challenge it, through moments of failure and recalibration, and the slow accumulation of evidence that you can survive your own vulnerability without being destroyed by it. The empath who reaches the avoidant has usually been through something. They have usually walked through their own version of the fire, a relationship that broke them, a period of profound loneliness, a confrontation with their own patterns that was impossible to look away from once it had been seen. That history is not incidental to who they have become. It is the material from which their strength was forged. There is a certain quality that emerges from that kind of forging. It is difficult to name, precisely because it operates below the level of behavior, below the level of strategy or technique. It is more like a frequency, a way of being present that communicates, without words, without effort, without conscious intention, I am not afraid of you. Not in an aggressive sense, not as a challenge or a provocation, but in the specific sense that matters most to an avoidant. I am not afraid of your distance. I am not afraid of your silence. I am not afraid of the parts of you that are still raw and unresolved and struggling to find language. I can sit in this discomfort without needing you to resolve it for me. I am capable of being with you in your difficulty without requiring you to perform a version of emotional availability that you do not yet have access to. That frequency, that unafraid presence, reaches the avoidant at a level that words never can, because the avoidant has heard words before. They have heard promises and declarations and elaborate verbal architectures of love and commitment, and every single one of those words came attached to an invisible string that pulled tighter with each expression of emotional need, confirming again and again the belief that love is a transaction, that closeness is a negotiation, that letting someone in means giving them the power to take something essential from you. But presence without agenda, presence without that invisible string, presence that is genuinely and completely unconditional in the truest sense of that word, not unconditional in the sense of accepting mistreatment, but unconditional in the sense of not requiring the avoidant to be different than they currently are in order for this empath to remain at peace with themselves. That presence bypasses every defense the avoidant has ever constructed, because there is nothing to defend against. The attack they have been bracing for never comes. And in the space where the attack does not come, something extraordinary becomes possible. The avoidant begins, slowly, tentatively, almost imperceptibly at first, to lower the guard. Not because they have been convinced to, not because they have been given a compelling argument for the safety of vulnerability, but because their nervous system has accumulated enough evidence, through sustained contact with this particular empath's unafraid and undemanding presence, to begin updating the ancient belief that intimacy is dangerous. The update is slow, it is not linear. There will be retreats and re-advances, and moments that look like regression but are actually part of the integration process. This is not a fairy tale. This is the long, patient, psychologically sophisticated work of two people in genuine contact with each other, one of whom has done enough of their own work to hold the space steady while the other finds their way toward it. What drives that patience in this empath is not martyrdom, and it is not resignation. It is something closer to what the philosophical traditions call equanimity, a stability of spirit that does not depend on external conditions for its maintenance. This empath has learned, through whatever path brought them to this point, that their peace is an inside job, that their sense of self does not require the avoidance validation to remain intact, that they can be deeply invested in this relationship, deeply caring, deeply hopeful, and simultaneously completely unattached to the outcome, in the sense that their fundamental okayness does not hinge on whether the avoidant ultimately chooses to open or not. That word, choose, carries more weight than most people assign to it when they use it casually in the context of relationships. Most conversations about avoidant attachment treat the avoidant as though they are a fixed object, a personality type carved in stone, a set of behaviors that will always and inevitably produce the same outcomes regardless of circumstance or contact. That framing is both intellectually lazy and profoundly unkind, to the avoidant and to everyone who loves them. Because what the research on attachment theory actually demonstrates, what the deepest psychological literature consistently points toward, is that attachment patterns are not destiny, they are adaptations. And adaptations, by their very nature, can be updated when the environment changes sufficiently to make the old adaptation unnecessary. The empath who understands this does not look at the avoidant and see a broken person who needs to be fixed. They see a person whose nervous system made the most intelligent decision available to it, given the conditions it was operating under, and who has not yet encountered the conditions that would make a different decision feel safe. That distinction between broken and adapted is not semantic. It changes everything about how this empath shows up. It removes the subtle but corrosive undertone of superiority that often poisons the empath-avoidant dynamic, where the empath unconsciously positions themselves as the emotionally evolved one who has come to rescue the damaged avoidant from their own limitation. The avoidant feels that undertone. They feel it immediately, even when it is carefully hidden beneath layers of warmth and patience, because people who have spent their entire lives reading the emotional temperature of rooms in order to know when to retreat are extraordinarily sensitive to the slightest hint of condescension. And condescension, however lovingly wrapped, is just another form of pressure, just another reason to close the gate. This empath brings none of that. They come without a rescue narrative, without a transformation agenda, without the quiet arrogance of someone who believes their love is the medicine that will cure what ails the avoidant. They come as a full person meeting another full person, both of whom are carrying the particular shape of their history, both of whom are works in progress, both of whom are capable of growth precisely because neither of them has yet arrived at the final version of themselves. That mutuality, that genuine felt sense of two incomplete people in honest contact with each other, is disarming to the avoidant in a way that perfected emotional technique never could be, because it is real. And the avoidant, beneath all their defenses, is starving for something real. Understand what that starvation feels like from the inside, because this matters. The avoidant does not walk through the world feeling powerful and free. That is the external appearance of their adaptation, not the internal experience of it. Internally, the chronic avoidant lives with a particular kind of loneliness that is arguably more painful than the loneliness of someone who simply has not yet found connection. Because the avoidant's loneliness exists in the presence of people who love them. They are surrounded sometimes by genuine affection and authentic care, and they cannot receive it. They stand at the feast and cannot eat. They watch themselves from some internal distance, performing the motions of relationship, while the deeper parts of them remain untouched, unmet, aching in a way they may not even have language for, because naming the ache would require acknowledging the need, and acknowledging the need would require confronting the vulnerability, and confronting the vulnerability is the thing the entire architecture of their personality was constructed to prevent. There is a truth that has been present beneath every word of this conversation, and it is time to state it without softening it, without wrapping it in comfort, without making it easier to dismiss than it deserves to be. The person who reaches the avoidant is not special because of what they feel. They are special because of what they have built, inside themselves, through work that nobody applauded, through growth that happened in private, through the long and unglamorous process of becoming someone whose presence is its own argument for the possibility of real love. That person can be you, but only if you stop waiting for the avoidant to change before you begin changing yourself. Only if you turn the full force of your considerable emotional intelligence inward, toward the architecture of your own psychology, toward the patterns you have been repeating, toward the wounds you have been managing rather than healing. The avoidant is not your project. You are your project. And when you have done that work with genuine seriousness, when you have built that interior solidity that cannot be shaken by withdrawal or silence, or the particular cruelty of being loved incompletely, you will not need to chase anyone. The right people will feel your gravity. They will move toward you, not because you performed it, because you earned it. Start that work today, not tomorrow, right now. The life you are waiting for is waiting for you to become ready for it.